So we've established a number of distinctions that we're claiming, given that we're neurolinguistic creatures, that we're time-binding creatures, we can't not make. That we will have some sense of speaking for ourselves, speaking for others, watching a scene from a distance. The sophistication we add to it in terms of being NLPers is that this can not only happen in actuality, as in, say that we're standing at Grand Canyon edge, something I did before, and there's a little turn in the railing there, and I'm looking over the edge, and my partner, and she's going, and I'm seeing this thing, she goes, you should look at that. And I said, I can't see that. And she says, well, look at it from my point of view. So I did, right? That there's the physicality of that. Or somebody says, you know, we need to back up and get the big picture. And sometimes people do, they back up and get the big picture. But we also know that that language can reflect or at least describe the same mental process going on, that I might see it from her perspective without physically moving, but in imagination moving, and that I might get the big picture, or I might back up and give myself room to breathe, and other phrases we had, not by physically backing up, but by mentally changing my representation. And that the language I use, neurolinguistics, is letting you know what my neurology is doing, and you can also read whether I'm doing that in my body. So that if I'm backing up, you see me lean back a little bit, and my face goes soft and so forth. And the same thing with the other distinctions. That in each case here, we have something that where we can shift, and you'll see a perceptual shift. So the perceptual positions, the content, this in the sense is what in an environment are we paying attention to? The other people, the environment itself, the place, what's going on in it, the information available, the things in it. That we can be matching and mismatching about that particular environment, about those people, about that information, going, that's not interesting. In other words, we made an evaluation. You know, this is better than I thought it would be. You know, I'm looking for what's new here. And so we come into the environment in a particular perceptual position, paying attention to certain content and noticing whether or not it in some way matches or mismatches our expectations. And that we do so with a logical level bias. And what I mean by that is that of all the things you can attend to the environment, some of you will be very sensory based. You'll be noticing, is the room warm? Is there a nice breeze? And so on. What are the noise levels? And so on. Others of you will be attending behavior. You could be attending your own behavior. You could be attending my behavior, somebody else's behavior in the environment. Or you could be attending to the capability. You go, how did he do that? Those how questions. You know, how did he do that? How did she do that? Then you're actually wondering about a capability, the strategy. A number of you, just by choosing the professions that you're in, are very attendant to people's values. You're listening for those value words we call criteria. You're listening for what they believe about themselves and about the world. And you respond to it. You may not even notice it till they say that. When somebody makes an attribution about themselves and goes, you know, I'd really like to get this stuff, but I'm just not smart. And rather than noticing that their arm is going down, or rather than wondering something, you notice right away that they've made a value statement about themselves, you pay more attention to that. You might not be able to tell me what they were wearing, yeah? But you could tell me what they said about themselves. And again, it's all there, and we, with our own radar, if you will, are paying attention to those aspects of the experience rather than others. And so we can speak in a way about what logical level the person is coming from, or is operating on. And that in that situation, there might be some towards and away from, that they might be seeking more excitation in the environment, making it more interesting for themselves, trying to learn something about it. And others might be going, wow, too many words. Whew. Give me a break. And we know in that the person is seeking to raise their serotonin levels. They don't know it's that. What they know is they'll feel better, and let's be clear about this, they'll feel more like themselves when they reach their level of familiarity. The same with all of these. That if you ask somebody to take an observer who wants to be in the moment. They get out to observer, they go, there's nothing happening out here. I want to get back in the action. It's unfamiliar. They don't make many distinctions. In the content, you say, now what's really important here is the information. And you might go, okay, I'll learn the information if I can apply it to people, okay? Do we have a deal? And so people will make these agreements with themselves as long as it's better than it was last time. And so each of us has already got ways that we're familiar with these. And so we're familiar with our own level of relaxation, excitation, our own sense of going towards or away from, if you will, and that we're doing that referencing which time frames and in which sequence. Are they doing it right now as you're taking a note? Of course, you're right now here. On the other hand, you might be taking a note going, thinking about that client back in Cincinnati, and actually, even though you're here in the room, your mind is out in the future wondering how you can apply that at some future point. Once again, talking to the person, we have certain information, the tense that they use, the gestures that they would use that would let us know which of those they tend to hang out in more. Everybody can do every one of them, and if they didn't, they wouldn't really be functional as adults. And having put in their minimum, adult daily requirement, a number of them stop there and begin to emphasize ones that they found more useful, more pleasurable, more engaging, to where we get a wide variety of patterns. So, a beginning, and we go to the next part, which is how do you stabilize a context? To do an elicitation. You recall I was saying in the early days they had these strange questions they would ask people, and even other kinds of questions they'd ask people to try and find out, for what we're interested in, what is the distribution of the metaprograms for that context. Or as John Grinder put it, he said, at least I hope that mowing the lawn and making love are different for you. However, having conversed about this, John and I think it's not different enough for most people. Just in case you're wondering, mowing the lawn, more visual perhaps. Making love, more kinesthetic perhaps. In other words, a shift of representational systems based on context. And one might expect the same kind of thing with the other metaprograms. So we want to be able to hold the context. We also want to know what context we're bringing up. So for example, if I ask somebody, tell me about and you'll see I scribbled here because I realized that there's a number of choices. A context, but that's fairly abstract, right? A situation. Tell me about something, but now I'm leaning into some things, right? Things that interests you. Now, if you just look at this, you can see already I've got tell, so we're already saying give me auditory. Tell me, that's actually a request to be other-oriented. About, now about is an ambiguous term. You could take about as in above it, or you take about as go into it. The person will give you that. And then what is it? A situation, a context, an accomplishment. Now if I pick an accomplishment, then I'm leaning towards the idea of something that they went toward and accomplished, right? So in every sentence you utter, interaction, it's already filled with metaprogram leanings where you're requesting of the friendly and cooperative primate that they do these sets of, and the thing is, what gets very interesting is that they may do them when they don't do them, when they ignore, like a politician, when they ignore your question and tell you what they want to tell you anyway, then you know you're getting the gold, you're getting the real information there. Unless it's pre-rehearsed, of course, like they do in speeches. But the idea being, you're listening, you want to know, tell me about something that interests you. You is what? Self.
Yeah. How about interest? Is that something that you're moving towards as well? Tell me something that interests you.
That interests you, right, that activates, I know, that's every word has metaprogram leanings in it. We're getting there, Ron. And this is a very significant learning to pick up.
So, these things that you have listed there
Mm-hmm.
are what you consider to be perceptual trauma.
Well, each of these is taken universally by whoever's doing the meta programs now as meta programs. And the basis of each of these is a perceptual prime.
Okay.
So this is, perceptual position is obviously a linguistic perceptual prime. And content is a cognitive prime. You can break it down into, mismatch is obviously an easy one to do. Logical levels, there's some questions about this, and yet everyone agrees to use it. Let's put it up there. Towards away from, everyone agrees to use it. I gave you a different take on it. And time frames, very easy to check grammatically. So your mission, should you decide to accept it, would be to do the exercise that we did yesterday at the end of the day, is to have one of your group talk about, tell me about something, tell me about situation, whatever way that rattles off your tongue that interests you, and let this person begin to talk. And then you two, as the people, as the observers, you're both going to, one is going to be the guide in that you're going to ask the question. But both of you are going to be eliciting whatever information you get, because the two different perceptual positions, the two different configurations of meta programs will be very helpful. You're going to notice different stuff. You're different people. Look around. You even wore different clothes today. How did you know to do that? I won't even say. And feel free to restrict this person from talking on too much. Get a sentence or two and have them stop. When I was going through training, we would do stuff like write down what the person said and then sit and analyze it for a half hour, or analyze it for a half hour. And that's why we stopped doing that. That can be useful as well, and I'm going to give you some useful strategies for that later on in the day. You want to be sure you don't get overwhelmed by the content, because what happens when you get a lot of content? You take it in through your meta programs, and you delete the stuff that doesn't fit. Or rather, scratch that. You don't even notice it, because you were attending other. That's what's important. How did those get on the page? So a sentence or two. Now the other reason for doing a sentence or two is that if you were sitting writing down what the person said, what? You'd miss all the nonverbals. And we really have begun to emphasize that these patterns show up in the person's nonverbals. If somebody is very environmentally oriented, they're very oriented to the senses, they're unlikely to do stuff like this, gestures up here, unless they're pointing at a mountain in their mind. Because we talk about higher values and lower values. So this is, again, cognitive linguistics. This is fundamental in human beings, that things are higher or lower. And so somebody talks about my higher values and they gesture up. If you're writing, okay, higher values, you also want to be able to begin to code together their nonverbals. So you're looking at them and listening and watching for a sentence or two, and then you pause. So you hit the pause button so they'll stop. And then you go, okay, what do we got so far? It's always a so far, because it's never over. The movie's not over yet. And then you go, okay, and you take the pause button off and you start up again. And then just a couple more sentences. You're watching the nonverbals, both of you, and pause. And of course, the person who it's being done with, you can be curious as well. Just remember, your job is the most difficult one. To fully and completely be yourself when you're speaking, so that they get your natural patterning. Because if you're watching yourself do your patterning, then you're what? You're observing, right? You've just changed one of the meta programs. So, unless you always watch yourself, in which case, that's the pattern, or part of the pattern, or part of the pattern. So questions on the exercise, very straightforward, a kind of practice that you're going to be doing more of, and we're going to get systematic as we go along. First thing I want to introduce is holding the context constant. So when the person starts to tell you about this, you want to find out more about this. And if they go, that reminds me, you go, well, I'm sure that's interesting, but tell me more about this. Because you want them to stay within the context. This was Roger Bailey and Ross Stewart's work, is that they would pick the work context and ask the persons the questions. And they were smart enough, they went to where they worked, and they had special folders, of which I have one, and you open it up and you fill it out right at work. So the whole environment would draw the person to be in the context and answer the questions in that context. We're out of context here, so you need to access the context with words. The person says some word, of course they emphasize it, like boating or something like that, then you know that's an anchor, and you can use that to help hold the context. All right? I'm thinking about 20 minutes to start, maybe a little longer. We'll see how it goes. Look for all three, yes. Now, just as I say, it's more important that you get a couple of sentences, do some comparisons, come back, a couple of sentences, do some comparisons, come back, a couple of sentences, come back, and you go, okay, we're beginning to see some patterns. Let's whip it around, because the changes between the people is as educational as getting more from the person. Yeah. Okay.